I didn't know that Jacob had completed his job of merging the two companies in 8 weeks. After that, he began to seduce my gullible wife. Like Sandy at school, Jacob was able to win over Carol. Despite my warnings about him, Carol seemed fascinated by the asshole and kept talking about what a great job he was doing. I kept warning her about Jacob, but she just said I was jealous. In her 4th month, Carol announced that she was pregnant. I was in 7th heaven. However, our sex life began to decline. From 3 times a week, it was reduced to once every 2 weeks. I put it down to Carol's pregnancy. Then our lunches together stopped, and finally Carol stopped commuting with me to work. The culmination of all this was the conversation. One morning, Carol stopped me before leaving for work. I was a little surprised to find that she was still at home, since lately she had been leaving at least an hour before me. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, inviting me to sit on the sofa. I sat down as I was asked, not realizing that we had to discuss something so important early in the morning. However, what Carol told me rocked my whole world. "I'm sorry to tell you this," Carol said, her eyes hard, "but I fell in love with Jacob, and he fell in love with me." I looked at her for a long time. As I studied her face, I realized that she had no regrets. Finally, I exploded. "Are you completely crazy? I told you Jacob is an asshole and he will try to drive a wedge between us. I can't believe you believe his complete crap." "He's not an asshole." Carol flushed. "He is a kind and loving person. He understands me, something you could never do." I felt my soul being destroyed with every word Carol said. At this point, I was desperate, so I did what I hoped would bring her to her senses. "What about our unborn child?" I said softly. "Doesn't this mean anything to you?" "The child is not yours," Carol answered with a forced smile. I was stunned by her statement. "It's a lie." "No, that's not true," she said. "We didn't have sex for 2 weeks when I got pregnant." Now, I was beside myself with rage. "You are a cheating bitch. You had sex with that piece of shit." "This is my body and I can do whatever I want with it," she shouted at me. "I don't belong to you." Devastation can't even begin to describe what I felt. But my father once told me to never show a woman that she hurt you. Maintaining my composure was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I managed to pull myself together and grinned at her. "You said that Jacob understands you in a way that I never understood." I laughed tightly. "You're right. He understands. He understands that you are a stupid, gullible piece of trash. God, how stupid you are. But you know what? You deserve each other. He's a fucking asshole, and you're a fucking bitch." "Fuck you, Michael," Carol raged. "No, this will never happen again," I said calmly. "But just so you know, I'm not moving out of this house. You can live with Jacob in his apartment." "We'll see about that." Carol turned and headed to the bedroom. What a nightmare I found myself in. Finding out that my loving wife had been having sex with Jacob all this time was too much to bear. Jacob, on the other hand, gave me no doubt. I cried all the way to work, but eventually pulled myself together. Well, that's an outright lie. I ran from pure rage. Along the way, I decided that I would resign and beat the crap out of Jacob, but not necessarily in that order. And then he ran into Jacob as he walked through the company's front door. He didn't seem at all alarmed when he saw me, and even grinned. The thought flashed through my mind that it would be very Carol-like to take charge and drop her little bomb on me without consulting Jacob. She was very independent. On the other hand, Jacob, as I suspected, had no intention of telling me about the baby before it was born. Then he would have taken away both my wife and my newly born child at the same time. This would be his final victory over me. Rage filled me as I approached him. He continued to grin. At that moment, I exploded and punched him in the nose and then in the mouth. Blood immediately started pouring down his face, but I wasn't finished. I gave him 2 strong blows to the groin, and when he began to fall apart, I hit him with an uppercut. Then I left him crumpled in front of the door as the guards rushed to help. I later learned that he had lost 3 teeth, in addition to a broken nose. Not everything was all right with me either. I broke 2 fingers on my left hand. I headed to the bullpen and began collecting all my personal belongings and papers into a box. Kimberly saw me, and I saw the worry and fear on her face. "What's happened?" She was sincerely worried. Jacob seduced my wife behind my back, and now she's leaving me for him. I just beat the crap out of him, so I guess I'm fired. And even if they don't fire me, I will quit. The rest of the staff were shocked by what happened. My team was not only upset for me, but also very worried about their jobs. I assured them that my action would not affect their future work in any way. Once the staff were reassured and assured that they wouldn't get hurt because of my stupidity, I went back to packing my things. But before I could finish, the police arrived, and I was arrested. I expected this to be my destiny, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon. While I was being handcuffed, I asked Kimberly if she could pack up the remaining items and take them home with her. After I was photographed, fingerprinted, and given paper towels to dry my fingers, I was allowed to make a phone call. But I didn't know who to call. My parents were on a cruise. Besides, they lived 2,000 miles away in San Diego, and I lived in Nashville. I definitely wasn't going to call Carol. Finally, I decided to call Kimberly. Maybe she can find me a lawyer. However, when I called Zaba, the receptionist told me that Kimberly was gone for the day. After that, I didn't know what to do and just sat in my cell, alternately angry as hell and wondering how I could get my wife back. One thought kept running through my head. How could Carol betray me in such a cold and heartless way? Then the thought of revenge overshadowed all others. As the day wore on and I languished in prison, it became clear to me that Jacob already had a plan. My problems were just beginning. I know Jacob didn't expect the beating he received today. However, I was convinced that Jacob expected me to attack him as soon as I learned of his betrayal. Only he believed that he could do this at a time convenient for himself and in a convenient place. Looks like I ruined that part of his plan. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I appeared before the judge for my arraignment. I was assigned a public defender because I did not have a lawyer. To my horror, he looked like a teenager with a bad complexion. Not only did my lawyer look like a child, but he also seemed to know nothing about me or my case. He quickly tried to read the file when the judge started to get annoyed with him. "Lawyer," the judge barked. "It's very simple. Does your client plead guilty or not guilty?" The guy looked at me like a deer in headlights. Then I jumped up and firmly stated, "Not guilty." "Thank God," the judge sighed. "Bail has been set at $2,500, cash or check." I didn't have nearly enough cash on me, and I didn't carry blank checks with me. So I looked up at the judge. "Sorry, Your Honor, but I don't have that much cash, and I don't carry blank checks with me. Is there any way I can contact the guarantor?" "My secretary will help you with this, and she will let you know when the trial date is set," he said. But before he could name the next case, I heard a voice behind me. "I'll post bail for him." I turned around to see Kimberly waving a checkbook. I was stunned to see her in the courtroom and very touched that she cared enough to come and help me. "I'll give you your money back as soon as I can get to the ATM, I assured Kimberly. "I'm not worried about it," she said softly, looking at my swollen hand. "Hurts badly? In the grand scheme of things, this doesn't even compare to the pain of Carol's betrayal." "For that matter, boss," Kimberly said, looking me in the eyes, "I think your wife is a very stupid bitch. She made a huge mistake by trading you for Jacob." I smiled at my administrative assistant. "Thank you, that's very kind of you." At that moment, the young man stepped towards me. "Are you Michael Arnold?" When I answered yes, he handed me an envelope and said, "You've been served." I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but the speed with which I was handed the papers left no doubt that Jacob and Carol had been planning this for some time. It was another cut in my heart. "Let's go get something to eat after I withdraw some money from the ATM," I said despondently. However, when I tried to log into my account, I was denied. I called the bank, and they told me that all my accounts were frozen. It will remain in effect until the court overturns it. Yes, now I know that you can file a petition with the court for relief from a complete asset freeze. But I didn't know that then. I also found out that my other savings account was frozen and my credit cards were canceled. A quick check of my wallet showed that I had $126 plus a $100 bill tucked into one of the folds. "Apparently, Carol and Jacob froze all my money," I told Kimberly. I don't know exactly what I should do, but at least I can buy you dinner. No, don't buy it, Kimberly protested. You come to my apartment and I'll cook dinner for us. I had to admit that I liked Kimberly's suggestion. It didn't make sense for me to spend what little money I had on lunches. We stopped at Zaba, picked up my car, and I followed Kimberly to her apartment. I couldn't believe how helpful this woman was to me. After all, she was just a work colleague. I was going to pay her back every cent and more as soon as I got my finances sorted out. At dinner, I felt really bad. Not only that, but 2 of my fingers hurt like hell. I put ice on them as soon as I got to Kimberly, but they still hurt. After watching me writhe in pain, Kimberly finally pulled out a packet of Percocet she'd bought for a root canal. I took 1 tablet, and after half an hour, the pain subsided significantly. However, I was not in good company. They really did a trick on me, I complained. I'm completely spoiled, taped up and tattooed. Now I can't even think about revenge on Jacob or Carol because it will come back to me like a boomerang. But someday, I'll pay these 2 bastards back in full. Mr. Arnold, Kimberly said softly. Please, call me Michael, I insisted. I'm not your boss anymore. Besides, what you did for me today makes you a very good friend. Kimberly smiled and continued. Michael, my mother cheated on my father and left him for another man. I had to live with her, and I hated every minute of it. Her lover was just as much of an asshole as Jacob. He never married my mother, but they lived together for 10 years until he found someone younger to run away with. My father was embittered and tried to take revenge on my mother for many years. He was imprisoned several times and eventually died a broken man. Don't waste your life trying to get revenge. In the end, my father told me that he truly regretted letting my mother's betrayal ruin him. He would like to just move on and forget this bitch. Today, my mother lives alone in a nursing home where she has breathing problems due to years of smoking. I visit her once a week, although I still don't like her very much. And every week, I have to listen to her lament about what a mistake she made by leaving my father, so please don't waste your life seeking revenge. I told her she was probably right. However, at that moment, I had no intention of letting those sneaky bastards off the hook. The anger was still bubbling under the surface, and I wanted my pound of flesh. After helping put away the dishes, I told Kimberly that I had to go and find a cheap motel. Her reaction was immediate. No, you won't do that. You will spend the night here. I have a spare bedroom, and you'll be glad to have it. Kimberly, you were the only ray of sunshine in the hole that became my life. I can't force myself on you anymore. First of all, this is not an imposition, she insisted. Secondly, if you sleep here, I can go to work tomorrow and find out what's going on. Again, Kimberly made a lot more sense than I did, so I accepted her invitation. Around mid-morning the next day, Kimberly called me to tell me that I had indeed been fired. She then told me to turn on her computer and type out an email instructing HR to send my latest check to her address. Surely, the head of human resources was not sure that the company was obligated to pay for my vacation and sick leave, but she believed that this still needed to be indicated in the letter. But after all, the courts froze all my money, I pointed out. Shirley told me the court order only applies to bank accounts. So write the letter as quickly as possible before Jacob or Carol realize what you're doing. After doing as Kimberly suggested, I received a fax stating that in a couple of days, I would receive a check for $4,125.57. The fax also stated that they should check state law to determine if the company must pay vacation pay or sick leave. As it turns out, no. Nevertheless, getting almost $5,000 was a great success. When Kimberly got home, she told me that Jacob wasn't there that day, but Carol was, and she was mad at me for ruining her relationship with her boyfriend. For some reason, this amused both Kimberly and me. I decided to stay at Kimberly's until I received my check. During this time, I compiled a resume and began actively looking for work. Very quickly, I discovered that Jacob and Carol had blacklisted me. Since I worked in cybersecurity, no one would take a chance on me having a felony conviction. When the check arrived, I gave it to Kimberly and she deposited it into her account. I didn't want to risk opening a new account and have it frozen too. When I told Kimberly again that I wanted to get rid of her worries and rent my own apartment, she was upset. Kimberly pointed out that without a checking account, I probably wouldn't even be able to rent a doghouse. In addition, if they checked my credit rating now, it would most likely show my financial difficulties. "Listen, please stay here until you find a new job," she convinced me. "In the meantime, you can find a lawyer." In the end, I agreed. The lawyer I hired took on my case after I paid him a down payment of $2,000. However, it was money well spent because he immediately petitioned the court to allow me access to a reasonable amount of money from our checking and savings accounts. The court allowed me to spend an amount sufficient to provide a minimum lifestyle. This, of course, included my lawyer's fees. I had been living in Kimberly's apartment for 8 days and decided it was time to leave. So I found an apartment in her complex and paid the required deposit for it. That Saturday, Kimberly helped me buy minimal furniture for my new apartment. At the same time, I invited her to dinner, which I promised her. Kimberly wanted to go to the Olive Garden, which I also love. During dinner, I studied her carefully. She had an angelic face, but the extra 50 pounds she carried detracted from that beauty. And I could tell that Kimberly was very self-conscious about her weight. Then I had an idea that I hoped she wouldn't find offensive. I turned it over in my head, deciding how best to present this proposal. "I just found out that there is a gym in our complex," I said casually. "I want to use it, but I would really like to have someone to go with. You're interested? Do you really want to be seen with me?" she asked, moving her hands up and down her sides, pointing out her extra weight. "Yes, I want to," I answered readily. "Unless you prefer not to be seen with a potential criminal." My comment got exactly the reaction I wanted. Kimberly really didn't want to go to the gym because she didn't want anyone to see her body. However, Kimberly did not want to offend me at all, so she agreed. We made a schedule where we went 4 times a week at 6 in the morning because there was never anyone there. After the first week, Kimberly realized she didn't have to worry about being embarrassed and began to enjoy the sessions. I continued to look for work, but no one in the security software industry was interested in me. At least until a decision was made in my case. In a conversation with a lawyer, I found out that there was a high probability that I would be found guilty of assault. However, he was careful. He never told me what to say or lie. However, he told me that if I had gone into a blind rage because of my boss and wife's infidelity, that could be a mitigating factor. And if I cannot remember what actually happened, the court, of course, will have to take that into account. On the day of the trial, Kimberly took time off from work and came with me. I really appreciated this support. When my lawyer learned that Judge Parker would be the presiding judge, he convinced me to request a closed court hearing. In this case, the judge makes the decision, not the jury. My lawyer explained that this would make the judge happy. And besides, Judge Parker hates cheaters. The prosecutor presented 3 witnesses to the alleged attack. They talked about what they saw and heard. My lawyer cross-examined them, forcing them to admit that they did not see the fight start or hear me threaten Jacob. They couldn't even say categorically that Mr. Sanders didn't throw the first punch. Jacob was then called to the stand where he told his story. Naturally, Jacob went into detail about what was described as an unprovoked attack. Jacob categorically claimed that he did not throw a single blow, and then listed the injuries he received. My lawyer asked him a question about his relationship with my wife. Jacob lied and said they were just friends. When asked about the child my wife was carrying, he told the judge that, as far as he knew, it was mine. When Jacob left the podium, he grinned at me as he returned to his seat. I was the only witness the lawyer called for my defense, and all he did was ask me to describe what happened that day leading up to the alleged attack and what I remember about the incident. I told her how my wife had surprised me this morning by telling me she was divorcing me so she could marry my boss. I was especially shocked when my wife told me that the child I thought was my own was actually Jacob's. I explained that she was the love of my life, but she threw me away like an old pair of shoes. I then told the judge that I remember seeing Jacob at the door and him smirking at me. After that, I lied and said I didn't remember anything until I was at my desk throwing things into a box. The prosecutor tried to confuse me with my memories. He kept trying to revise the chronology of events. The truth was that I was so furious that morning that I had no idea of the time. And the more he questioned me, and tried to get me to indicate specific times and actions, the more obvious it became that I did not remember anything. He then asked me if I really thought the court would believe that I had no memory of the attack. I told him that on the way to work I had a headache and saw flashes of light, which was actually true. I repeated that all I remember was Jacob smirking at me. He then asked me if I knew for sure that the child my wife was carrying was Jacob's. I told him that all I could tell him was what my wife said. Carol was not in court because no one bothered to subpoena her. My lawyer told me that he thought my wife would be a wild card that he didn't want to touch. I believe the prosecutor felt the same way. After my speech, the judge retired to his chambers to consider the verdict, but returned 10 minutes later. "It is clear to me," said Judge Parker, "that Mr. Arnold was betrayed in the most cowardly and shameful manner.